Hey everyone, welcome back to CreepyCorner Stories. You know, diving into the dark web is always risky, but sharing these stories with you makes it worth it. I'm curious, where are you watching this from right now? Let me know in the comments below. I've noticed that these kinds of stories hit differently depending on where you are. It might even make the experience a little creepier. So, tell me, are you watching from the safety of your home or somewhere less secure? I paid a dark web hacker to track a missing friend. The coordinates they sent me point to a hidden room inside a local mall. So, this all started 6 months ago, and it still doesn't feel real. I keep going over it in my head, asking myself if I could have done something different, if maybe I missed a sign. But honestly, I don't think anything could have prepared me for what happened. Jake was my best friend. He was the kind of guy who made every boring thing fun. Late night fast food runs, trash talking each other in Call of Duty, or just wasting hours scrolling TikTok and sending each other the dumbest memes we could find. He had this energy that pulled people in, but at the same time, Jake wasn't one to let people get too close. He was loud, hilarious, and just a little bit reckless, but he never let you see what was going on under the surface. That's why it took me so long to notice something was off. It started small. He'd cancel plans last minute, or go hours without responding to texts, which wasn't like him. Jake was the guy who would spam your phone with memes even if you told him you were busy. At first, I figured he was just wrapped up in work or dealing with Becca, his girlfriend. Their relationship was messy, to say the least. On again, off again, constant fights over the dumbest things. Classic train wreck. But then one day, Jake just stopped. No texts, no calls. No random Snapchats of his cat doing something dumb. It wasn't like him. At first, I thought he might have gone on one of his spontaneous road trips. He'd done that before. But a week passed, and then two, and nothing. Becca was the one who convinced me to go to his apartment. When we got there, it was like walking into a snapshot of his life before he disappeared. His car was parked outside. His mail was stacked up in the mailbox, and his lights were off. Becca still had a spare key, so we let ourselves in. His cat, Meatball, was sitting by the door, looking annoyed, like he was waiting for someone to come home. That was the first red flag. Jake loved that cat more than anything. He wouldn't just leave him behind like that. The second red flag was the state of his apartment. It wasn't trashed or anything, but it wasn't normal either. His bed was unmade, there were dishes in the sink, and his laptop was still open on the coffee table. It looked like he'd just stepped out for a second and never came back. We called the police, obviously, but you know how it goes. He's an adult. He can go wherever he wants. The detective barely even looked at us before shrugging it off. They filed a report, but it was clear they weren't going to do much. Becca was freaking out, and I didn't blame her. Jake wasn't the kind of guy to ghost people, especially not for this long. That night, I went home and started going through old messages, trying to see if Jake had said anything that might give me a clue. That's when I remembered the DM. It was on Discord, the night before he vanished. He'd sent me a single message. If something happens to me, check my Google Drive. At the time, I'd brushed it off as one of Jake's weird jokes. He was always into these creepy internet rabbit holes, haunted websites, lost media, those weird subreddits that feel like they shouldn't exist. I figured it was just another one of his hobbies. But now it felt like something more. I opened the link he'd sent me. It took me to a folder titled Project Nautilus. Inside were a bunch of files, screenshots, chat logs, and what looked like random GPS coordinates. At first, it didn't make any sense. The chat logs were filled with cryptic messages like, "The veil is thin here. You can't delete what's already been seen. Coordinates confirmed. Proceed with caution." The usernames were weird too. Stuff like Signal Decay and Monarch Shadow. It felt like some kind of code, but I had no idea what it meant. The screenshots were just as strange. Images of Google Maps with random locations marked. Snippets of text that looked like they'd been copied from some old forum, and what might have been parts of an email thread. But the thing that really caught my eye was the last file. It was a plain text document, just a few sentences long. They found me. I'm sorry. If you're reading this, don't follow the trail. It's not worth it. It felt like a punch to the gut. What had Jake gotten himself into? I stared at that screen for what felt like hours, trying to piece it all together. The more I read, the more paranoid I felt, like someone was watching me through my own computer screen. I thought about going to the cops with what I'd found, but what was I supposed to say? "Hey, my friend disappeared, and now I've got a folder full of creepy deep web nonsense." They'd think I was crazy, and maybe I was. But then I noticed something else. The last set of coordinates Jake had saved. They weren't random. They pointed to a place I knew, a stretch of forest just outside the city, near an old mall we used to hang out at in high school. It was one of those spots you go to when you're a teenager looking for trouble, but it had been years since I'd even thought about it. The more I stared at the coordinates, the more the uneasiness in my gut grew. Something was waiting there, something Jake didn't want me to find, but at the same time, I couldn't just ignore it. So, I made a plan. I couldn't shake the feeling that the coordinates were important, but every time I thought about going there, my chest tightened like a vice. It wasn't just fear. It was this overwhelming sense that whatever was waiting for me wasn't meant to be found. That's when I realized I couldn't do this alone. I needed answers, but I didn't have the tools or the guts to chase them myself. That's when I thought about the dark web. Jake had always been fascinated by the hidden corners of the internet. He talked about forums and sites you couldn't just stumble onto, places where people traded more than Bitcoin and bootleg movies. I'd never paid much attention before, but now it felt like the only lead I had. The problem, I didn't know the first thing about accessing it. I spent the next few days obsessively watching YouTube tutorials and reading forum posts. Half the stuff I read sounded like fear-mongering. Don't go on the dark web unless you want your computer hacked and your bank account drained. But desperation is a hell of a motivator. Eventually, I downloaded Tor, set up a VPN thanks to a shady subreddit guide, and dove in. Let me tell you, the dark web is not what you think it is. There's no ominous background music, no flashing signs that say, "This way to your doom." It's just quiet, and that quiet is unsettling in a way I can't explain. There's nothing to distract you from the fact that you're somewhere you shouldn't be. I spent hours poking around, clicking through random forums and marketplace links. Most of it was junk. Fake hacking services, overpriced counterfeit goods, and threads filled with people trying way too hard to sound edgy. But then I found a post titled, "Missing Person Services, No Questions Asked." The post was short and to the point, with a link to a site called Deep Signal. I clicked it, my palms already sweating. The site was bare bones, just a black screen with a single line of text. Everything has a price. Beneath it was a chat box. I typed, "I need help finding someone." The response came almost instantly, like whoever was on the other end had been waiting. "Name?" I hesitated. Even through the screen, it felt like this person was staring at me, watching me type. But what choice did I have? I typed Jake's full name and hit send. Another pause, longer this time. Then, proof? I scrambled to attach the screenshots from Jake's Google Drive, the chat logs, and the coordinates. My hands were shaking as I hit send. When the message finally went through, I felt like I was about to puke. A new message appeared a moment later. Payment, 0.5 Bitcoin, non-refundable. Half a Bitcoin. At the time, that was a couple $1,000s. I stared at the screen, trying to decide if I could justify spending that kind of money on something that might be a scam. But every time I thought about backing out, I pictured Jake, his stupid smirk, the way he'd always laugh at his own jokes. If there was even a chance this could help me find him, I had to take it. I transferred the Bitcoin. The screen went blank for a moment, then a new message appeared. You will receive an update within 24 hours. And that was it. No instructions, no reassurance, just silence. I closed my laptop and sat there in the dark, wondering if I'd just been played. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, expecting it to be an update. But it was never the update, just work emails, spam texts, or my mom reminding me to take out the trash. Meanwhile, I kept rereading the files Jake had saved, trying to make sense of them. The chat logs seemed like fragments of a bigger conversation, but without context, they felt like gibberish. Do not engage unless the signal is confirmed. Local disruptions reported. Tracking now. The forest gate is opening again. Proceed with caution. The more I read, the more paranoid I got. What gate? What signal? And why did Jake seem so convinced that someone or something was after him? Finally, at 3:27 a.m., I got an email. No subject line, no sender info. Just a single message. Coordinates attached. Do not go alone. The email included a screenshot of Google Maps with a red circle marking the location. I opened it and felt my stomach drop. It wasn't the forest. It was somewhere I recognized immediately. The mall. Specifically, the old Sears building. I hadn't been to that mall in years. Back in high school, it was the place to be. Cheap food, crappy movies, and stores filled with junk no one needed. But like a lot of malls, it started dying out. First, the big-name stores left. Then, the food court went. The Sears was one of the last places to close, and when it did, the building was sealed off, or at least it was supposed to be. The idea of going there in the middle of the night felt insane, but the thought of waiting until morning was somehow worse. So, I grabbed my flashlight, threw on a hoodie, and headed out. The drive was short, but felt like forever. By the time I pulled into the mall's empty parking lot, my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The Sears building loomed in the darkness, its windows boarded up, and the faint outline of its old sign barely visible. I parked near the side entrance, where the loading docks used to be. The door was chained shut, but the chain had been cut, clean, like someone had just done it. For a second, I thought about turning back. This was crazy, right? Breaking into an abandoned building in the middle of the night because some faceless hacker on the dark web told me to. But then I thought about Jake, how he'd been fearless about everything, always pushing me to step out of my comfort zone. So, I took a deep breath, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. The air was heavy and stale, like the inside of an old freezer that hadn't been opened in years. My flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing rows of broken shelves, shattered glass, and graffiti scrawled across the walls. The place felt like a tomb, cold, silent, and untouched. I followed the coordinates on my phone, weaving through the debris toward the back of the store. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of my own footsteps echoing off the concrete floors. As I got closer, I started to notice things that didn't belong. Scorch marks on the walls, strange symbols scratched into the floor, and an overwhelming smell of something metallic, like blood or rust. Finally, I reached the coordinates. They led me to a steel door near what used to be the stockroom. The door was slightly ajar, a faint glow seeping through the crack. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to turn around, but I couldn't. I had to know what was inside. I pushed the door open. What I saw made my stomach turn, but that's a story for the next part. The door creaked open, and my flashlight beam cut through the stale air. The space beyond wasn't what I expected. It wasn't some trashed stockroom or forgotten storage closet. No, this was something different, something deliberate. The walls were painted a deep, sickly gray, like they'd been coated in layers of grime over the years. The room was small, maybe 10 feet by 10, with a single table in the middle. On it was an old laptop, the screen glowing faintly in the darkness. The air was thick with a metallic smell that made my stomach churn. It reminded me of a time I'd sliced my hand on a rusty nail as a kid, iron and rot. But it wasn't just the smell. There was something else in the air, something I couldn't explain. It was oppressive, almost physical, like the room itself was alive and watching me. I stepped closer, my footsteps muffled by the layers of dust coating the floor. The laptop looked ancient, one of those clunky models you'd expect to see in an old tech museum. Its screen flickered slightly, displaying a single blinking cursor in the center. I reached out, hesitating for a second, then tapped the touchpad. The screen lit up, revealing a live feed. At first, I couldn't make out what I was looking at. The footage was grainy, like it was being filmed with a camera from the 90s. The frame showed a room, not the one I was in, but somewhere else. The walls were bare concrete, and the only light came from a single dangling bulb swinging gently back and forth, casting long, eerie shadows. Then I saw him. Jake. He was sitting in a metal chair in the middle of the frame, his head slumped forward, his arms limp at his sides. His clothes were filthy, his hair matted with something dark, blood maybe, or dirt. For a moment, I thought he wasn't breathing, but then he shifted slightly, and I realized he was alive. "Jake," I whispered, as if he could hear me. My voice sounded weak and small in the dead silence of the room. I glanced around the laptop screen, looking for anything that might explain what I was seeing. That's when I noticed the text on the bottom of the feed. It was a timestamp, but it didn't make sense. The time was normal, 2:43 a.m., which matched the clock on my phone, but the date was wrong. It said 2032. "What the hell?" I muttered, my breath fogging the screen. Before I could process it, the feed changed. The camera angle shifted slightly, zooming in on Jake's face. He was pale, his eyes half open, but unfocused, staring at nothing. I leaned closer, trying to make out any details that might give me a clue about where he was. That's when I saw his lips move. It was barely perceptible, just the faintest twitch, but he was saying something, words, over and over, like a mantra. I turned up the volume on the laptop, but there was no sound, just silence. I squinted at the screen, trying to read his lips. It took a moment, but then I understood. 4 words, repeated endlessly. It's in the room. My blood ran cold. I froze, staring at the screen, my mind racing. What was he talking about? What room? I was about to grab my phone to take a picture when the feed glitched. The screen went black for a split second, then came back, but something was different. The camera angle was wider now, showing more of the concrete room. And I wasn't alone. There was something standing in the corner, just outside the pool of light cast by the swinging bulb. It was tall, inhumanly tall, its limbs too long, its body too thin. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, like it was studying Jake. I couldn't see its face, but I didn't need to. The way it stood, motionless yet somehow alive, was enough to make my skin crawl. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. My eyes were glued to the screen as the thing began to move. Slowly, deliberately, it stepped closer to Jake. Its movements were jerky, like a puppet being controlled by invisible strings. Jake didn't react. He just kept repeating those 4 words. It's in the room. Suddenly, the feed cut out. The screen went black, and the laptop let out a faint whine, like a dying electronic gasp. I sat there in stunned silence, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't know what to do. Should I call someone? The police? But what would I even say? That I'd seen my missing friend on a live feed from a laptop in an abandoned Sears. I was still trying to process it when I noticed something strange. The metallic smell in the air. It was stronger now, overpowering, and then I heard it. A faint scraping sound, like metal against concrete. It was coming from behind me. I turned slowly, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run, but my legs felt like lead. The door I'd come through was still open, but something was moving in the darkness beyond it. A shadow, long and thin, sliding across the floor. I backed away, clutching my flashlight like it was a weapon. The scraping sound grew louder, closer. My flashlight beam flickered, and for a split second, I thought I saw something. A hand, impossibly long, with fingers that ended in sharp, black claws. I didn't wait to see more. I bolted, sprinting back through the store, my footsteps echoing like gunshots. The air felt heavier with every step, like the darkness itself was pressing down on me, trying to pull me back. I didn't stop until I was outside, gulping in the cold night air. When I finally looked back, the Sears building was as silent and still as it had been when I arrived, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting. That's when my phone buzzed. I fumbled to pull it from my pocket, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped it. It was another email. No subject, no sender, just a single line of text. You saw it, didn't you? I didn't sleep that night, and I knew deep down that this was far from over. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. My apartment suddenly felt too small, too exposed, like whatever I'd seen, or whatever had seen me, could follow me there. Instead, I drove, aimlessly at first, the dark streets blurring past as I tried to get my breathing under control. But no matter how far I went, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was sitting in the back seat, just out of sight. Eventually, I ended up in a parking lot, outside a 24-hour diner. It was one of those places that looks like it's straight out of the 70s, with faded neon lights buzzing faintly, and a waitress who looks like she's seen it all. I sat at a booth in the corner, nursing a coffee I didn't touch, staring at my phone. The email was still open. "You saw it, didn't you?" I didn't reply. I couldn't. What would I even say? Instead, I scrolled through the other files Jake had saved, looking for something, anything, that could explain what I'd just experienced. That's when I found it. It was a screenshot of a map, but not like the ones from Google. This one was different, older. The mall was there, but it wasn't labeled as a mall. Instead, the building was marked with a single word: terminal. Next to the map was a file labeled Sublevel Plans. I opened it, and my stomach dropped. The plan showed the mall's layout, but there was a second layer beneath it, a sprawling network of tunnels and rooms, none of which were supposed to exist. One of the rooms was marked with a red X, and beneath it, in Jake's handwriting, were the words, "They move through the dark." I don't remember driving back to the mall, but I must have. When I came to, I was sitting in my car, staring at the abandoned Sears building. The sun was just starting to rise, casting long, eerie shadows across the cracked pavement. I knew I should leave, but the files Jake left me were burned into my brain. I couldn't ignore them, not after what I'd seen. This time, I came prepared. I grabbed a crowbar from my trunk. Don't ask why I had one, and a headlamp I used for camping trips. My phone was fully charged, and I downloaded a map of the sublevel plans just in case. I told myself I'd be in and out. No distractions, no hesitating. Just find whatever Jake wanted me to see and get out. The Sears building was even creepier in the daylight. The boarded-up windows seemed to glare down at me, and the chain on the side door was still hanging loose. I slipped inside and retraced my steps from the night before, careful not to make too much noise. When I reached the steel door, I hesitated. The memory of that thing in the live feed was still fresh, and I half expected it to be waiting for me on the other side. But the room was empty. The laptop was gone, and the air felt colder than before, like whatever had been there had taken something with it when it left. I checked the plans on my phone. According to Jake's files, there was a hidden staircase somewhere in the back of the store, behind a false wall. I searched for what felt like hours, running my hands along the dusty walls until I found it. A narrow seam in the drywall, just wide enough for my crowbar. With a deep breath, I pried it open. The staircase was steep and dark, the kind of place you'd expect to find in a horror movie. The air was damp and smelled like mildew, mixed with something else, something faintly sweet and sickly, like rotting fruit. I turned on my headlamp and started down, each step creaking under my weight. At the bottom, the tunnel stretched out in both directions, lined with pipes that dripped a slow, steady rhythm. The walls were covered in graffiti, but not the kind you'd see in a normal abandoned place. These symbols were precise, geometric, almost ritualistic. They made my skin crawl. I followed the map on my phone, the red X burning in the corner of the screen. The further I went, the stranger the tunnel became. The graffiti turned into carvings, etched deep into the concrete, like they'd been made with something sharp. And then there were the sounds, faint at first, whispers maybe, or the soft shuffle of feet, but growing louder with every step. I reached a metal door, rusted and warped with age. It matched the one on the map, and behind it was the room with the red X. I pressed my ear against the door, straining to hear anything. Silence. Whatever was making those noises wasn't here. Not yet. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was massive, far larger than it should have been. The walls were lined with shelves filled with old equipment, radios, monitors, and strange devices I didn't recognize. In the center of the room was a circular platform surrounded by wires and cables that snaked across the floor like veins. Above it, suspended from the ceiling, was a massive black sphere. It seemed to absorb the light from my headlamp, leaving the room in an unnatural twilight. And then I saw the chair. It was the same one from the live feed, same metal frame, same frayed straps hanging from the armrests. But Jake wasn't there. Instead, there was a notebook sitting on the seat, its pages stained and torn. I grabbed it, flipping through the pages, my hands trembling. The writing was Jake's, but it was messy, frantic, like he'd been scribbling in a panic. Most of it didn't make sense. Equations, strange symbols, and fragments of sentences like, "The terminal is awake. They're in the walls. Do not let it touch you." But one page stood out. It was cleaner, more deliberate, as if Jake had taken his time with it. It read, "If you're here, you've seen it. It knows you now. Don't trust what you hear. Don't trust what you see. Get out before it closes the gate." As I read the last line, the room plunged into darkness. The sound came first, a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the walls. Then the whispers started again, louder this time, overlapping and echoing until they felt like they were coming from inside my own head. My headlamp flickered, and for a moment, I thought I saw something move near the edge of the room. The growl turned into a roar, and the walls began to shake. I didn't wait to see what was coming. I bolted, clutching the notebook to my chest as I sprinted back toward the staircase. The tunnel seemed longer than before, the darkness closing in around me. Something was chasing me. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. Its presence, its breath on the back of my neck. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening, until they suddenly stopped. I reached the stairs and scrambled up, nearly tripping over my own feet. When I burst back into the store, the air felt lighter, but I didn't stop. I ran until I was outside, the sunlight blinding me as I collapsed onto the cracked pavement. I looked back at the Sears building, expecting to see something, anything, following me. But it was just as silent and still as before, empty. But I knew better now. It wasn't empty. It was waiting. I don't know how long I sat there, hunched over on the cracked pavement outside the Sears building, trying to catch my breath. The sunlight should have been comforting, a reminder that I was out of that suffocating dark. But it wasn't. The air still felt heavy, like something from that place had followed me, even if I couldn't see it. I held the notebook in my lap, the pages trembling in my hands. Every instinct told me to throw it away, burn it, or leave it behind and never look back. But I couldn't. This was Jake's last breadcrumb, and despite everything I'd just seen, I still didn't have answers. All I had was more questions. I flipped through the pages again, forcing myself to focus. I stopped on one near the end, where Jake had drawn a crude diagram of the mall. He'd scribbled notes in the margins, barely legible. The gate opens from below. The sphere is the anchor. Once it begins, it won't stop. But it was the last line that froze me. It needs a witness to close the loop. By the time I got back to my car, my head was spinning. The whispers were gone, but I could still feel them crawling just under my skin, like they were waiting for the right moment to start again. I didn't drive home. Instead, I went to the nearest Starbucks, ordered the strongest coffee they had, and sat in the corner, trying to piece it all together. Jake hadn't just stumbled into something. He'd been drawn into it, slowly and deliberately, like bait in a trap. And now, so was I. I thought about the live feed, the timestamp showing the wrong year, the thing in the corner of the room. It wasn't just watching Jake. It was watching me. I had to find Jake. I couldn't just walk away, not after everything. But going back to the Sears building felt like suicide. I needed a plan, or at least someone who could help. My first thought was the dark web, but every time I pictured logging back onto that black screen site, my stomach turned. Still, I needed answers, and I couldn't do this alone. That night, I dug through the files Jake had left me one last time. Buried in the chat logs was a name I'd skimmed over before, Ouroboros. It had come up in one of Jake's conversations, followed by a single line. They tracked the signal. I had no idea who or what Ouroboros was, but it was my only lead. I opened my laptop, fired up Tor, and searched for the name. It didn't take long to find it. Ouroboros wasn't a person, it was a service. The site was minimalist, just like before. A black screen, a chat box, and a single tagline. Everything is connected. I typed, "I need help finding someone." The response came instantly. "You already know where he is." I froze. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as a chill ran down my spine. Whoever this was, they knew. They'd been watching me. I typed back, "What do you mean?" The reply came, as calm and cold as ever. "The gate is open. If you leave it, he'll stay." My breath caught in my throat. Jake wasn't just missing. He was trapped, and whatever had him wasn't going to let go without a fight. I don't know what possessed me to go back to the Sears building that night. Maybe it was guilt, maybe desperation, or maybe something else entirely. But as I stood outside the door again, staring into the darkness, I knew this would be my last trip. The staircase was colder this time, the air heavier, like the tunnels themselves were alive. My headlamp flickered as I made my way back to the room with the sphere. It was still there, suspended above the circular platform, its surface impossibly dark. But now, the room wasn't empty. Jake was sitting in the chair. He looked worse than he had in the video. His skin was pale and stretched tight over his bones, his eyes sunken and glassy. He didn't move as I approached, didn't flinch when I called his name. It was like he was there, but not really, like a mannequin wearing his face. The whispers started again, faint at first, but growing louder with each step. My flashlight flickered, and I thought I saw something move in the corner of the room. A shadow, impossibly long and thin, stretching across the wall like it was alive. I reached Jake and grabbed his shoulder, shaking him hard. "Jake, it's me. We have to get out of here." His head lolled to the side, and for a moment, I thought he was dead. But then he blinked, slow and deliberate, his lips parting just enough to speak. "Don't let it see you." Before I could ask what he meant, the room shifted. The sphere above us began to hum, a deep, resonating sound that made the walls vibrate. The cables on the floor started to writhe like snakes, and the shadows in the corner grew darker, denser, until they spilled across the room like ink. Something stepped out of the shadows. It wasn't human. It wasn't even close. Its body was elongated and angular, its limbs moving in unnatural, jerky motions, like a spider learning to walk. Its head was featureless, save for a single point of light where its face should have been, a cold, unblinking eye that burned straight through me. Jake's voice, weak and broken, pulled me back. "The loop. You have to break the loop." I didn't know what he meant, but I didn't have time to figure it out. The thing in the shadows moved closer, its body twitching violently as it stretched toward me. I grabbed the notebook from Jake's lap and ran. The tunnel seemed endless this time, twisting and turning in ways they hadn't before. The whispers followed me, growing louder, overlapping until they weren't whispers anymore but screams. The air grew colder, the shadows darker, and every time I glanced back, the thing was closer. When I finally burst into the light of the mall above, I didn't stop. I ran through the empty aisles, past broken displays and shattered glass, until I was outside, gasping for air. I turned back toward the Sears building, expecting to see the thing chasing me. But there was nothing, just silence. The air felt different now, lighter, as if whatever had been waiting inside was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't eat. I just sat at my desk, staring at the notebook, trying to make sense of the last page Jake had written. It was a single sentence, scrawled in shaky handwriting. It always needs someone to see it. I never found Jake. Not really. Whatever was in that room wasn't him anymore. And the worst part? I think he knew that. I think that's why he left the notebook, why he sent me the files. Because now, I see it. Every time I close my eyes, it's there, waiting, watching. The loop isn't broken, it's just started again. And now, it's my turn. I found a dark web ritual that summons Santa's true helper. When the helper arrived, it wasn't wearing clothes, just antlers and a smile. Alright, so let me just preface this by saying I've always been a curious person, like the kind of curious where you find yourself on weird parts of YouTube at 3 a.m. watching conspiracy theories about Disneyland's abandoned animatronics or deep dives on unsolved urban legends. I'm the guy who clicks the link everyone else says not to. So when my buddy Mike started rambling about the dark web during one of our late night gaming sessions, I was all in. He's the type who's always trying to one-up his own edginess, and after a few beers, the guy was practically begging me to check it out for myself. He swore there were no red rooms or illegal stuff, just weird niche sites with creepy vibes. Mike even gave me this sketchy-looking guide, like a cheat sheet for first-timers. Just don't go too deep, he warned with a smirk, unless you want to meet Santa's helper. I laughed it off. Santa's helper sounded like some dumb creepypasta he made up. But later that night, after everyone logged off, curiosity got the better of me. I fired up my old laptop, downloaded the Tor browser, and dove into the unknown. The first hour was underwhelming. I landed on forums with glitchy backgrounds and people trying to sell everything from counterfeit sneakers to haunted dolls. One site claimed it could predict the date of your death, but all it asked for was your full name and credit card info. Yeah, no thanks. Then I found something that made my stomach flip. The site was called Winter Veil Truths. The homepage was simple, a black background with white text that read, "Do you want to know the real story of Christmas?" Below, it was a single hyperlink, "Meet Santa's Helper." I hovered over the link, my finger twitching on the trackpad. This had to be some elaborate prank, right? But something about it felt off, like the way the page loaded too slowly, or how my laptop fans kicked into overdrive the second I clicked the link. But I clicked anyway. The page that opened looked ancient, like something coded in the early 2000s. It was mostly text, with a single grainy image of what looked like a deer skull. mounted on a wooden plaque. Except, on closer inspection, the skull wasn't quite right. The teeth were too human, and the eye sockets were too deep. Beneath the image, a message flashed in red. Summon the helper. He only comes to those who believe. There was a list of instructions below. No frills, no weird fonts. Just plain text, written like a checklist. Find a place with snow under the stars. Bring an offering. Something sweet, something sharp, and something personal. Draw the sigil in the snow. Whisper his name 3 times. Krampusnoot. Wait. I laughed out loud. This had to be a joke, right? Some edgy teenager trying to scare strangers. But then I noticed the comments section. Hundreds of replies, each one weirder than the last. It worked. My cousin hasn't been the same since. Do not summon him alone. He took my voice, but left me my life. That's the deal I made. One comment stood out. It was from someone named Winterwatcher23, who simply wrote, "He loves sweet things. Be careful what you give him." I closed my laptop and went to bed, trying to brush it off. But the image of that deer skull stayed with me. Even as I scrolled through TikTok to distract myself, every video seemed to have some Christmas theme. Santa, reindeer, candy canes. It was like the algorithm knew what I'd seen. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The ritual, the comments, that name, Krampusnoot. It was stupid, but a part of me wanted to try it, just to see what would happen. Snow wasn't exactly hard to come by. I live in Wisconsin, where winter feels like 80% of the year. And with Christmas lights up in every Starbucks and McDonald's parking lot, the whole town had this creepy Hallmark movie vibe anyway. Perfect for some midnight nonsense. So I grabbed my gear, a flashlight, a knife, and an old chocolate bar I found in the back of my pantry. For the personal item, I picked a bracelet my ex gave me last year. It was cheap, but sentimental enough to feel like it mattered. I drove out to a clearing near the edge of town, where the streetlights faded and the trees were heavy with snow. It was so quiet, I could hear my own breathing, and for a second, I wondered if I was actually about to do this. My phone had no signal, and the wind had this low whistle that sounded way too much like whispering, but I was committed. I used the knife to carve the sigil in the snow, copying it from memory, a weird, lopsided star with loops at the edges. Then, I placed the chocolate, the knife, and the bracelet in the center. My heart was pounding by the time I knelt down to whisper his name. "Krampusnoot," I said, barely audible. Nothing happened. "Krampusnoot." Still nothing. I felt ridiculous. "Cramp!" Before I could finish, the wind stopped. Completely. The trees went still, the air so cold, it burned my lungs. And then, I heard it. Footsteps. They weren't coming from the road or the trees. They were coming from behind me. I froze, my flashlight shaking in my hand. Slowly, I turned around. There, at the edge of the clearing, stood a figure. It was tall, easily 7 feet, and hunched like it had too many joints. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and it wasn't wearing clothes. Just a pair of massive antlers that looked like they belonged to a creature twice its size. Its mouth stretched into a grin, too wide, with too many teeth. And then it spoke. "Merry Christmas," it said, its voice like a mix of static and laughter. It started walking toward me. When I tell you my body locked up like I was frozen in place, I mean it. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. Hell, I could barely breathe. That thing, whatever it was, just kept walking toward me. Its grin didn't falter, and its eyes, oh man, those eyes, were completely black, not like a deep brown or something poetic. No, they were like two holes drilled into its face, like someone had taken a marker and scribbled them in. The closer it got, the more I noticed these tiny details that made my skin crawl. Its arms were too long, ending in thin fingers tipped with claws. Not fingernails, but claws, like curved pieces of bone that gleamed under the moonlight. Its skin looked tight, like it had been stretched over its frame, and there was this faint shimmer to it, almost like frost. And the antlers? They were massive, but jagged, with sharp edges that looked like they could cut you if you got too close. But the worst part wasn't its appearance. It was the smell. You know that sickly, sweet stench when you leave milk out for too long? It was like that, mixed with something metallic, like blood. I gagged as the scent hit me, and that small movement was enough to make the thing stop in its tracks. It tilted its head, almost curious, like it was sizing me up. "You called," it said, its voice high-pitched and raspy, like static on a broken TV. "You believe." I wanted to deny it, to scream that it wasn't true, but my voice wouldn't come out. My body was trembling so hard, it felt like my legs would give out at any second. It took another step forward. I instinctively backed away, but the snow was deep, and my boots slipped. I fell onto my back, the cold seeping into my jacket instantly. The flashlight I'd been clutching rolled out of my hand, casting its beam across the snow and illuminating the sigil I'd drawn. The creature crouched down near the edge of the symbol, its grin somehow growing wider. "Sweet, sharp, personal," it muttered, almost to itself. Its bony hand reached out and plucked the chocolate bar from the snow. For a moment, I thought it might actually eat it, but instead, it brought it to its nose and sniffed, long and deep. "Sweet," it hissed, nodding approvingly. Then it turned its attention to the bracelet. Its claws closed around it, lifting it like it weighed nothing. The thing stared at the bracelet for a long moment, its grin faltering for the first time. "Personal," it whispered, but there was a strange tone in its voice now, almost disappointed. Then, it picked up the knife. I don't know what I expected it to do, but I wasn't prepared for what happened next. The creature ran its claw along the blade, testing its sharpness. Then it pressed the knife against its own forearm and dragged it down in a slow, deliberate motion. I winced, expecting blood, but what came out wasn't red. It was black, thick like tar, and it smelled even worse than the creature itself. "Sharp," it said, its grin returning. It tossed the knife back onto the snow, the blade now slick with its strange black blood. "You brought the right gifts." I was still frozen, trying to process what the hell was happening. This couldn't be real. It had to be some insane prank, or maybe I was hallucinating from the cold. But then the thing did something that shattered any hope I had of this being fake. It stepped into the sigil. The air around us changed instantly. The cold I'd been feeling suddenly deepened, like the temperature had plummeted in an instant. Frost spread across the snow, radiating out from the sigil like veins, and the trees around the clearing began to creak and groan. The stars overhead seemed to dim, their light swallowed by the darkness spreading outward from the creature. "Now," it said, standing tall once again. "What is your wish?" My wish. I stared at it, dumbfounded. The comments on the website hadn't mentioned anything about a wish. Was this some kind of genie situation? My mind raced, but before I could say anything, the creature took another step toward me, its black eyes narrowing. "You do have a wish, don't you?" it asked, its voice almost playful now. No one calls me without a reason. I didn't think it would actually work, I stammered, my voice finally breaking free. Its grin faltered again, and for the first time, I thought I saw something like anger flash across its face. It leaned down, so close that its antlers cast long shadows across my face. You waste my time, it hissed. You summon me for nothing? I shook my head frantically, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. No, wait. My mind scrambled for something, anything that might satisfy it. I want to know the truth about Christmas, about you. The creature straightened, tilting its head again. Its grin returned, but this time it was different, darker, more sinister. The truth, it repeated, its voice dripping with mockery. Is that all? I nodded, though I wasn't sure if that was the right answer. The creature let out a sound that might have been laughter, but it was jagged and broken, like someone trying to laugh while choking. Very well, it said, but the truth is a gift that cuts both ways. Before I could react, it lunged forward. Its clawed hand shot out, grabbing my wrist in an iron grip. I screamed, the cold of its touch burning my skin like frostbite. Then it leaned in, its black eyes boring into mine, and whispered two words that made my blood run cold. Watch closely. Suddenly, I wasn't in the clearing anymore. The world around me twisted and blurred, like watercolors running together. When my vision cleared, I was standing in the middle of a small, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with shelves, each one crammed with toys. Hand-carved wooden soldiers, porcelain dolls, tin trains. They were old, covered in dust, and yet they all seemed alive. Their eyes followed me as I moved, their expressions frozen in silent screams. In the center of the room was a large workbench, a figure hunched over it, working feverishly. At first, I thought it was Santa. The red suit was unmistakable. But when the figure turned, I realized its face was wrong. The smile stitched across its face wasn't jolly or warm. It was cruel, the stitches barely holding back rows of jagged teeth. Do you see? The creature's voice echoed in my head. The truth is not what you imagined. I tried to back away, but the scene shifted again, the room dissolving into darkness. Now I was in another place, another time. A family sat around a fireplace, laughing and opening gifts. But something was wrong. The firelight cast shadows that didn't match the people's movements. The gifts they unwrapped weren't toys or clothes. They were body parts. A hand, a foot, a head. Enough! I screamed, clutching my head as the vision swirled around me. Stop it! And just like that, I was back in the clearing. The creature stood over me, its grin wider than ever. Now you know, it said, the truth of the season. I scrambled to my feet, my body trembling. What the hell was that? What did you show me? But it didn't answer. Instead, it turned and began to walk away, its massive antlers scraping against the branches as it disappeared into the forest. Just before it vanished, it looked back at me one last time and whispered, "Merry Christmas." And then it was gone. I didn't move for what felt like hours after that thing disappeared into the woods. My legs felt like jelly. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my flashlight. And my brain? My brain was fried. The clearing was deadly silent, but I swear I could still hear its voice echoing in my head. The truth of the season. What the hell did that even mean? Those visions, those weren't just nightmares. They felt real. Too real. I could still see that stitched up grin on the thing in the red suit. And the family by the fire. The way they laughed, as they unwrapped bloody dismembered. I gagged just thinking about it. I told myself to get the hell out of there. Standing around wasn't going to help, and every second I stayed in that clearing felt like an invitation for something worse to show up. So I grabbed my stuff. Well, what was left of it. The knife was still slick with that black gunk, and the bracelet had disappeared entirely. I didn't even want to touch the chocolate bar. It looked wrong now, almost melted, but not quite, like it had been sitting in an oven instead of snow. I stumbled back to my car, tripping over roots and branches like a total idiot. The entire walk, I felt like I was being watched. You ever get that prickling feeling on the back of your neck, like someone standing just out of your peripheral vision? Yeah, multiply that by 10, and that's what it felt like. Every gust of wind sounded like whispers, and the shadows between the trees seemed darker, like they were moving closer. By the time I reached my car, I was practically hyperventilating. My keys were freezing in my hand, and it took me 3 tries to get them into the ignition. When the engine finally roared to life, I peeled out of there so fast, I nearly skidded off the road. The headlights cut through the forest, and for a split second, I thought I saw something tall and pale standing just off the tree line. But I didn't stop. No way. The drive home was a blur. I had the radio blasting Christmas music, hoping it to drown out the noise in my head. Big mistake. Every song sounded wrong. Like, seriously wrong. The lyrics weren't what I remembered. Santa Claus is Coming to Town had this off-key chorus, and I swear one of the verses went something like, "He sees you, he knows you, he's already here." I nearly drove off the road trying to change the station, but every channel was the same. Distorted carols, like someone had taken classic Christmas songs and run them through a blender. By the time I made it back to my apartment, I was shaking so badly I could barely get the door unlocked. Once I was inside, I locked the door behind me and shoved a chair under the handle for good measure. My apartment felt wrong too. I know that sounds stupid. It's my place, my stuff. But the air was heavier somehow, and the shadows seemed longer. I turned on every single light and even checked all the closets like some paranoid kid. Of course, nothing was there, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I collapsed onto the couch, still wearing my coat and boots. My brain was racing, trying to make sense of everything. Was it a prank? Some elaborate ARG I'd stumbled into? But how do you explain the thing I saw in the woods? Or those visions? That smell? My chest tightened as I remembered the black blood on the knife. That's when I noticed my phone buzzing on the coffee table. A text. It was from Mike. "Yo, did you actually try the helper thing? Tell me you didn't. Seriously." My heart sank. I stared at the screen, the words swimming in my vision. How did he know? Had he been watching? I wanted to call him, but my hands were shaking too much to hold the phone steady. Instead, I typed out a quick reply. "Yeah. Why? What's going on?" The dots popped up immediately, showing he was typing. Then they disappeared. Then they came back. Finally, his response appeared. "You need to leave. Now." Leave? Leave where? My apartment? The city? My brain was running in circles, trying to process what he meant. I typed back. "What are you talking about? What did you mean when you told me about this? What do you know?" No response. I waited, staring at the screen, but nothing. I tried calling him, but it went straight to voicemail, and then my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a text. It was an email. The sender's name was Winter Vale Truths, the same name as the website. My stomach dropped. The subject line just said, The deal is sealed. I didn't want to open it. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to delete it, to throw my phone out the window. But I couldn't stop myself. My thumb hovered over the notification for what felt like an eternity before I finally tapped it. The email was short. The helper has been sent. Be sure to keep the sweet things handy. He gets hungry. There was an attachment, a photo. My finger hesitated over it, my whole body trembling. But again, that stupid curiosity of mine won out. I opened it. The picture was dark and grainy, but I could just make out my own apartment building, my unit, my window. And standing just outside the glass, barely visible in the shadows, was a figure. Tall, thin, antlers. I dropped my phone like it had burned me, scrambling off the couch so fast I nearly tripped. My breathing was shallow, my chest tight. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I turned toward the window, my heart pounding in my ears. The curtains were still closed, but there was something pressed against them, something big. I could see the outline of antlers, the faintest hint of that grin beneath the fabric. It wasn't moving, just standing there, waiting. I didn't know what to do. My brain was stuck in some fight or flight loop, but neither option seemed possible. Could I run? Maybe. But where? Would it even matter? The thing outside shifted slightly, the antlers scraping against the window pane. The sound was like nails on a chalkboard, and it snapped me out of my paralysis. My eyes darted around the room, looking for something, anything I could use to defend myself. The knife from the woods was still in my backpack, but I wasn't about to touch that thing again. And then I remembered the email. Be sure to keep the sweet things handy. I bolted to the kitchen, tearing through cabinets like a madman. The only thing I could find was a half-empty bag of marshmallows from God knows when. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely tear the bag open. Grabbing a handful of marshmallows, I walked back to the window. The shadow behind the curtains hadn't moved. It was still standing there, perfectly still. I reached out, my hand shaking, and pulled the curtain aside just enough to see. It was worse than I'd imagined. The grin was even wider now, its teeth glinting in the dim light. Its black eyes locked onto mine, and I swear its body twitched, like it was straining to come inside. Slowly, I held out the marshmallows, my hand trembling. It tilted its head, then leaned closer. The marshmallows were shaking so badly in my hand, I thought I might drop them, and the creature's black eyes never left mine. It didn't blink, didn't even flinch, just stared, its head tilted in that unnervingly animalistic way. My breath fogged up the glass, but its grin never wavered. Then, slowly, it raised one of its claws. It tapped the window. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound was faint, almost polite, like it was asking for permission to come inside. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I opened the window. Not fully, just a crack. Cold air rushed in, sharp and biting, and that sickly sweet smell hit me like a brick wall. The thing leaned closer, its grin somehow wider now that it was inches from my face. I didn't speak. I didn't breathe. I just extended my hand, holding out the marshmallows like some kind of peace offering. The creature paused. Its black eyes flicked down to my hand, then back to my face. For one terrifying second, I thought it was going to grab me instead. But then, with an almost delicate motion, it plucked a single marshmallow from my palm. Its grin faltered, just for a moment, as it inspected the marshmallow. Then it opened its mouth, revealing rows of jagged, 2 white teeth, and popped the marshmallow inside. The sound it made was unsettling, like a wet crunch, even though marshmallows aren't supposed to crunch. It tilted its head back, letting out a low, satisfied hum that sent chills down my spine. "Sweet," it rasped, its voice like ice scraping over stone. "Good." It reached out again, its clawed hand hovering expectantly. I hesitated, but what choice did I have? I dumped the rest of the marshmallows into its palm, hoping that would be enough to keep it happy. The creature stared at me for a moment, then withdrew its hand, pulling the marshmallows close, like they were some kind of treasure. For a brief moment, I thought that might be it. Maybe it would just take the marshmallows and leave me alone. But then it did something that made my blood turn to ice. It smiled wider. "More," it hissed, its voice a low growl now. "Sweet things. Always more." I stumbled back, my heart racing. "That's all I have," I blurted, my voice cracking. "I don't have anything else." The creature's grin faded, its antlers twitched, scraping against the top of the window frame, and its claws tightened around the marshmallows, crushing them into a sticky, gooey mess. The black pits of its eyes seemed to grow darker, and for the first time, I felt its anger, sharp and suffocating, like the air had been sucked out of the room. "Liar," it hissed, its voice echoing in my skull. "You summoned me. You brought the offerings, but it's not enough." I backed away, my hands raised in a futile attempt to protect myself. "I didn't know this would happen. I didn't mean—" It cut me off with a guttural snarl, its claws slamming against the window. The glass rattled, but it didn't break. Not yet. "You wanted the truth," it said, leaning closer. "But truth has a cost." The room around me seemed to darken, the corners swallowed by shadows that moved and twisted like living things. I could feel the weight of the creature's presence pressing down on me, and for a moment, I thought I might black out. Then, it whispered something that made my blood run cold. "You owe me." Those 3 words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. My mouth went dry, and I felt my knees weaken. I tried to speak, to say anything, but no sound came out. The creature straightened, its antlers casting long, jagged shadows across the room. "Sweet things," it repeated, its voice almost thoughtful now. "Sharp things, personal things. You will give them, or I will take them." My stomach twisted at the implication. I didn't know what it meant, not fully, but I could feel the threat in its words. And then it did something that made my heart stop. It reached through the window, its clawed hand stretched impossibly far, the pale, frost-covered skin glinting in the dim light. I scrambled backward, tripping over the coffee table and falling hard onto the floor. The creature didn't grab me, at least not yet. Instead, it plucked something off the mantel above my fireplace. It was a framed photo of me and my sister, taken last Christmas. We were sitting in front of the tree, wearing matching ugly sweaters and laughing. The sight of it in the creature's hand made my chest tighten. It turned the photo over, its black eyes studying it intently. Then, slowly, it pressed a single claw to the glass. The sound of it scraping against the frame was like nails on a chalkboard, and when it was done, the photo was changed. My sister's face was gone, erased, just an empty void where she should have been. "No," I whispered, crawling toward it. "No, no, no. Put it back." The creature didn't respond. It simply held the photo up, letting me see its handiwork, before tucking it into the shadowy folds of its form. "Personal," it said, almost mockingly. "Good." I lost it. I lunged forward, grabbing the knife from my bag and slashing wildly at its arm. The blade sank into its flesh, but instead of blood, that same black, tar-like substance oozed out. The creature hissed, its grin twisting into a snarl, and yanked its arm back through the window. For a moment, I thought I'd actually hurt it, but then it laughed, a deep, rumbling laugh that made the walls shake. "Foolish," it said, its voice dripping with amusement. "You cannot harm me, but I can harm you." The shadows around the room seemed to close in, and the temperature dropped even further. My breath fogged in the air, and my vision blurred as the weight of the creature's presence bore down on me. "Your offerings are insufficient," it said, its tone cold and final. "But I am patient. I will return, and you will give me what I am owed." With that, the shadow surged forward, swallowing the creature whole. The room brightened instantly, the oppressive darkness lifting as if it had never been there. The only sign it had ever existed was the black, tar-like substance smeared across the windowsill and the ruined marshmallows on the floor. I sat there for what felt like hours, clutching the knife and staring at the window. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion. What did it mean? I will return. What would it take next? My thoughts kept circling back to the photo, to the empty void where my sister's face had been. I grabbed my phone, desperate for answers, and opened the email from earlier. But it was gone. No trace of it. Even the website. When I tried to pull it up again, it wouldn't load. It was like it had never existed. But the smell lingered. That sweet, rotten smell. And I knew deep down, this wasn't over. The days after that night passed in a haze. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat much either. Every creak of my apartment building, every distant sound outside my window, sent my heart racing. I kept all the lights on, every curtain drawn, but it didn't matter. That feeling of being watched never went away. I didn't leave my apartment unless I absolutely had to, and when I did, I made sure to keep my trip short. Even then, I couldn't shake the paranoia. Passing reflections in shop windows made my stomach drop. Shadows on the street looked like antlers if I stared too long. My friends started texting me, asking why I wasn't answering calls or joining gaming nights, but I couldn't explain it to them. What was I supposed to say? Sorry, I summoned some dark Christmas demon, and now it's stalking me. And then there were the dreams. Every night, the same nightmare. I was back in the clearing, carving the sigil into the snow. But this time, I wasn't alone. The creature was standing behind me, its breath cold against the back of my neck. It didn't speak. It didn't move. It just watched as I went through the ritual over and over again, its grin stretching wider with each repetition. When I woke up, my body ached like I'd been running for hours. The air in my apartment smelled faintly of pine and something sweet, like candy left to rot. I didn't know if it was in my head or if the creature was still lingering, just out of sight. But then, on the fourth night, something changed. I woke up to the sound of tapping. At first, I thought it was the dream again, but no. This was real. It wasn't coming from the window this time. It was coming from my bedroom door. The tapping was slow and deliberate. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more. I sat up in bed, my chest tightening. My apartment was small, and the idea of someone or something being on the other side of that door made my blood run cold. I grabbed the knife I'd kept on the nightstand since that night in the woods. My hand shook as I crept toward the door, the tapping continuing like a metronome. When I was close enough, I pressed my ear against the wood, holding my breath. At first, there was nothing. just silence. But then I heard it. A low, guttural voice, so faint I almost missed it. Sweet things, sharp things, personal things. I stumbled back, clutching the knife so tightly my knuckles turned white. It was here. It had come back. Go away, I shouted, my voice cracking. I don't have anything for you. The tapping stopped. For a brief moment, I thought it might have left. Maybe it had decided I wasn't worth the effort. But then, slowly, the doorknob began to turn. My stomach dropped. The lock held, for now, but the sight of it twisting, rattling, made me feel like a cornered animal. And then it spoke again, louder this time. The door will not hold forever. The voice sent shivers down my spine, and I knew I couldn't just stand there waiting for it to break in. I needed to do something. Anything. I bolted for the living room, grabbing my phone off the coffee table. My first instinct was to call the cops, but what was I going to tell them? That a Christmas demon with antlers was trying to get into my apartment. They'd either laugh or send me straight to a psych ward. Still, I dialed 911, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. The line connected, but instead of the operator, I heard static. Then, faintly, beneath the crackling noise, a voice whispered, "No one can help you." I dropped the phone, my heart pounding. The static continued, louder now, filling the apartment like a physical presence. It wasn't just coming from the phone anymore. It was everywhere. The TV turned on by itself, the screen flickering with static. The lights dimmed, and that sickly sweet smell grew stronger, suffocating. And then, the door creaked open. I spun around, clutching the knife, but it wasn't enough. The creature stepped into the room, its antlers scraping the ceiling, its grin wider than ever. It didn't say anything this time. It didn't have to. The weight of its presence was enough to bring me to my knees. "You owe me," it said, its voice echoing like 100 whispers layered together. "I don't have anything else," I cried, tears streaming down my face. "Please, I didn't mean to." The creature tilted its head, studying me. Then, slowly, it reached out, its clawed hand brushing against my cheek. The touch burned like ice, and I felt a strange numbness spreading through my body. "You summoned me. You brought the offerings. And now," it leaned in, its black eyes inches from mine. "Now, you are mine." I don't remember much after that. Just flashes, the shadows twisting around me, the sound of its laughter, cold and hollow, and pain, searing, unrelenting pain, like my very essence was being pulled apart. When I woke up, I was lying in the snow, the clearing. My car was nowhere in sight, and the sigil I'd drawn was gone, replaced by a series of strange, overlapping symbols I didn't recognize. My body felt wrong, like something inside me had shifted. I stumbled back into town, my clothes soaked and my mind racing. No one believed me when I tried to explain what had happened. Not the cops, not my friends. Even Mike, the one who had started this whole mess, acted like he didn't know what I was talking about. "Helper. Dude, I never told you to summon anything," he said, his voice shaky. "Are you sure you're okay?" But I knew he was lying. He wouldn't look me in the eye. That was weeks ago. The thing hasn't shown up again. Not yet, anyway. But I can still feel it. Watching. Waiting. And then there's the other thing. I haven't told anyone about this part, because I'm not sure what it means. Every time I pass a mirror, my reflection looks off. The grin is a little too wide, the eyes a little too dark, and sometimes, when I look long enough, I swear I see antlers. So, if you ever find yourself scrolling the dark web late at night and you come across something about Santa's helper, do yourself a favor. Don't click it. And whatever you do, don't say his name. I found a YouTube video from an account that doesn't exist. It shows a dark web ritual, summoning a being that looks like Santa, but it's not him. Alright, so before I get into this, I just want to say I'm not the kind of person who messes around on the dark web. Like, at all. I know there's weird, creepy stuff out there, and honestly, I'm more of a YouTube and TikTok on the couch kind of guy. But this wasn't my fault. I didn't even mean to find it. It just showed up. It all started last weekend. I was scrolling YouTube late at night, trying to find something to fall asleep to. You know, one of those top 10 creepiest unsolved mysteries kind of videos, because I'm weird like that. Anyway, I was about 3 videos deep when the algorithm decided to throw me something off. The thumbnail caught my attention right away. It was super dark, almost like a black screen, but with this faint red glow in the center. It kinda looked like a campfire, but the flames were wrong. Like, they didn't flicker the way fire should. They swirled, like smoke trapped inside glass. The title was The Ritual Live, and the uploader, well, here's where it gets weird. There wasn't a name, not like a random string of numbers or some edgy handle, just nothing. Where the username should have been, there was a blank space. At first, I thought my phone was glitching or something, but the view count, that wasn't blank. It said 2,837 watching now, which, okay, isn't crazy for a live stream, but for a channel that didn't even seem to exist, that was weird. I hesitated. I mean, I'm not stupid. I've seen enough horror movies to know this was a bad idea, but curiosity got the better of me. I clicked. The screen went black for a second, and then the live stream loaded. At first, I couldn't make out what I was looking at. The video quality was terrible, all pixelated and grainy, like it was being filmed on one of those old school webcams from the early 2000s. But after a few seconds, the picture sharpened just enough for me to see. Well, I think it was a basement. The walls were concrete, and there were no windows, just this single dangling light bulb that kept flickering like it was on its last leg. In the middle of the room was this table, or maybe an altar, covered with a black cloth. On top of it were these weird objects, a bowl filled with what looked like blood, some candles, and this gnarly-looking statue. It was about a foot tall, carved out of wood, and shaped like Santa Claus, but not the jolly Coca-Cola commercial kind of Santa. This one was thinner, almost skeletal, with sunken cheeks and these long, bony hands that looked like claws. His face wasn't smiling. It was grinning. The camera panned over the table, and then a voice spoke. It was muffled, like it was coming from behind a mask, and the person, whoever they were, was speaking in a language I didn't recognize. It wasn't Latin or anything you'd hear in a typical horror movie. It sounded guttural, almost wet, like they were gargling the words. I felt my stomach twist. I should have clicked off right then and there, but I couldn't. Something about it was hypnotic. And then, as the voice droned on, the camera shifted again. This time, it pointed at the floor, where someone, or something, was sitting in a circle, drawn with what looked like chalk. At first, I thought it was a person. They were wearing a red suit, kinda like Santa's, but it was filthy and torn, like they'd been dragged through a swamp. Their head was bowed, so I couldn't see their face. But the longer I watched, the more I realized their proportions were off. Their arms were too long, almost dragging on the floor, and their chest was heaving like they were struggling to breathe. Suddenly, the person, or whatever it was, snapped its head up, and I swear, I nearly dropped my phone. Its face was pale and gaunt, with hollow eye sockets and a mouth that stretched way too wide. But the worst part? The beard. It wasn't white and fluffy like you'd expect. It was thin and matted, almost like cobwebs. I don't know how long I stared at the screen, frozen. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only a few seconds. And then, without warning, the live stream cut out. Just like that. No warning, no buffering, just a black screen with the words, "Video unavailable." I sat there for a minute, trying to process what I'd just seen. My first thought was, okay, that was creepy, but it's probably just some ARG or viral marketing thing. I mean, it had to be, right? There's no way something like that was real. But when I tried to refresh the page to see if the live stream had moved to a different link, YouTube told me the account didn't exist. Not that the video was deleted, the account was gone, like it had never been there to begin with. At that point, I was thoroughly freaked out. I closed YouTube, tossed my phone on the nightstand, and tried to go to sleep. But I couldn't stop thinking about that thing in the circle, the way its mouth moved, like it was whispering something I couldn't hear. I told myself I'd forget about it by morning. I didn't. And that's when things started to get worse. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming through my window and the weirdest feeling in my chest. You know that sense of unease you get when you wake up from a bad dream? Except this wasn't just a dream. It was real. Or at least, I thought it was. The more I tried to replay the events in my head, the less they made sense. Maybe I'd imagined some of it. Maybe it was just some over-the-top viral marketing stunt. Still, it bugged me. So after a long internal debate and 2 cups of coffee, I decided to check YouTube again. I mean, maybe I'd find some other videos connected to the one I saw. Maybe other people had seen it too, and I wasn't just losing my mind. I grabbed my phone and opened the app, fully expecting the algorithm to throw me another creepy rabbit hole. Instead, my home feed was completely normal. It was all the stuff I usually watched. Gameplay videos, dumb memes, true crime stories. No sign of the live stream, the weird thumbnail, or anything even remotely similar. But here's the thing. When I went into my history to find the video, it wasn't there. At all. Now, I know what you're thinking. Maybe I forgot to log into my account or something. But no, I was 100% logged in, and every other video I'd watched that night was listed there, right down to the dumb compilation of dogs failing obstacle courses. But the ritual, live, gone, like it never existed. That was strike one. I tried to shake it off and go about my day. But as the hours passed, little things kept gnawing at me. I couldn't stop picturing the thing in the red suit, the way its chest moved, like it was alive, but wrong. The thought of it gave me goosebumps. By the time the sun started setting, I was so restless, I decided to do something, anything, to distract myself. I figured a walk might help. There's this 24-hour Starbucks a few blocks from my apartment, and I thought grabbing a coffee and zoning out with a podcast would help clear my head. So, around 9 p.m., I threw on a hoodie, popped in my AirPods, and headed out. The streets were quiet, except for the occasional car passing by. It was one of those chilly December nights where you can see your breath in the air, and all the houses had their Christmas lights up, Normally, I love this time of year, but for some reason, the decorations felt off, like they were mocking me. I know how dumb that sounds, but every time I passed one of those inflatable Santa decorations, I felt this weird sense of dread, like their smiles were just a little too wide. I shook it off and picked up my pace. By the time I got to Starbucks, I was feeling a little better. The place was mostly empty, just a couple of college kids studying in the corner, and an older guy typing away on his laptop. I grabbed my drink, found a table by the window, and pulled out my phone. That's when I noticed it. My notifications were blowing up, not from Instagram or TikTok, just my messages, and they weren't from anyone I knew. All the texts were from an unknown number, and they were bizarre. The first few were just random letters and symbols, like someone had smashed their keyboard. But as I scrolled, they started to form words. Why did you watch? You shouldn't have seen. Do you know what you invited? My stomach dropped. I had no idea how this person got my number, and honestly, I didn't want to find out. I blocked the number immediately and shoved my phone back in my pocket. I told myself it was just some prank. Maybe someone hacked my account or something. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. When I got home, the first thing I did was double-check all my locks. The second thing I did was grab my laptop. If the video wasn't in my history, maybe I could find it by digging through Reddit or Twitter. There are entire subreddits dedicated to weird YouTube videos, and I figured someone else might have seen it too. I started with r/unresolved mysteries, then moved to r/creepy internet. Nothing. I even checked YouTube's subreddit to see if anyone had posted about a glitch or a random live stream popping up. Still nothing. It was like the video and the account never existed. Finally, I decided to post about it myself. I kept the description vague, just said I'd seen a creepy live stream with a weird Santa figure, and I couldn't find any trace of it now. I hit submit and waited. Within minutes, I got my first reply. It was a user with no profile picture and no post history. All they said was, "You should stop looking." I stared at the comment for a good 10 seconds before refreshing the page. When it reloaded, the comment was gone. Not downvoted, not deleted, just gone. Like it had never been there. At this point, I was spiraling. I decided to log off, shut my laptop, and just chill out for a bit. Whatever was happening, it wasn't worth losing my mind over. But as soon as I stood up, the lights in my apartment flickered. Not like a quick, harmless flicker either. It was a long, deliberate pulse, like someone was messing with the circuit breaker. And then, from somewhere outside, I heard it. A low, rasping laugh. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to freeze me in place. It sounded like someone trying to mimic Santa's ho ho ho, but it was distorted, wrong. It wasn't coming from my hallway or the street below. It was coming from right outside my window. I didn't want to look. I knew I shouldn't. But you know how, when someone says don't look, your brain immediately tells you to do the opposite. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. Slowly, I turned my head and glanced at the window. At first, I didn't see anything, just the reflection of my living room. But as my eyes adjusted to the dark, I saw movement, a shape. It was blurry, like it was standing just outside the range of the street lamp. But I swear, it was wearing red. And its face? It wasn't a face at all. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I spent the whole night sitting on my couch, clutching a kitchen knife and jumping at every little sound. But when the sun came up, there was no sign of the figure outside. No footprints in the snow, no shadows, nothing. Just one new message on my phone. He's closer now. The day after that incident, everything felt off. You know when you're half asleep and you can't tell if something really happened or if you dreamed it. That's how my entire day felt. But deep down, I knew I wasn't imagining this. Between the live stream, the messages, and whatever was outside my window, it was all too real. I spent most of the day pacing around my apartment, checking my locks, my windows, my phone. I even taped over my laptop's webcam, just in case. It didn't help. That thing, whatever it was still in my head. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw its face. Or lack of one. By the afternoon, I realized I couldn't just sit there, waiting for something to happen. I needed answers. I grabbed my laptop, opened a private browser, and started searching. I tried every keyword I could think of. Dark web rituals, creepy Santa figures, live stream summoning. Nothing useful. Just the usual urban legends and clickbait articles. Then I remembered the statue, that gnarled wooden figure from the live stream. It wasn't like any Santa Claus I'd ever seen. I tried searching for descriptions. Thin Santa statue, creepy Christmas iconography, ritualistic Santa. Still nothing, until I stumbled on a random Tumblr post from 2016. The post didn't have a title, just a blurry photo of a statue that looked eerily similar to the one in the video. Thin, skeletal, grinning with those claw-like hands. Beneath the photo, the caption read, "This is not St. Nicholas. This is something else. Don't invite him in." That was it. No context, no explanation, no comments. The account that posted it had been deleted. But now my heart was racing, because this meant I wasn't crazy. Someone else knew about this thing. I spent the next couple of hours spiraling deeper into research. Most of it was dead ends, random forum posts, and threads that led nowhere. But one link caught my eye. It was buried on the 3rd page of search results, titled simply, "The Red Visitor." The page was ancient. It looked like it hadn't been updated since the early 2000s, with one of those plain black backgrounds and neon green text. At the top, there was a single paragraph. "The Red Visitor is an entity summoned through specific rituals during the winter season. It is not Santa Claus, but it often takes his likeness to deceive. It comes bearing gifts, but these gifts are curses. Never look into its face, and never, under any circumstances, let it inside your home." Underneath was a list of instructions for the ritual. Most of it matched what I'd seen in the live stream. The black cloth, the candles, the bowl of blood. But there was one detail I hadn't noticed before. The chalk circle wasn't just a barrier. It was a doorway. At this point, I was freaking out. I slammed my laptop shut and tried to focus on anything else. But the second I stood up, I noticed something strange. My apartment smelled different, like burning wood. I checked the stove. It wasn't on. Then I checked the heater, but it was off too. The smell was faint but persistent, like someone had lit a campfire somewhere nearby, except it wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from my bedroom. My heart was pounding as I crept down the hallway. The door to my bedroom was closed, but there was a faint glow coming from the crack underneath. At first, I thought maybe I'd left a light on, but as I got closer, I realized the glow wasn't white or yellow. It was red. I stood there for a moment, frozen, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. But then I heard it. A faint rustling sound, like fabric being dragged across the floor. My hand was shaking as I reached for the doorknob. When I finally turned it and pushed the door open, I almost screamed. The room was empty, no figures, no glowing shapes, but the smell of smoke was stronger now. And on the floor, right in the middle of the carpet, was a perfect circle. It looked like it had been burned into the fibers, but there was no ash or scorch marks around it, just a clean, blackened outline. And inside the circle, a single gift box. The box was small, about the size of a shoebox, and wrapped in this old-fashioned red paper with a white ribbon. The edges were too sharp, too precise, like it hadn't been wrapped by human hands. There was no tag, no writing, nothing to indicate where it had come from. I stared at it for a long time, debating whether or not to open it. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to leave it alone, to get out of the apartment and never come back. But my curiosity got the better of me. I mean, what was I supposed to do? Just leave it there? I grabbed a pair of scissors from my desk, crouched down, and carefully cut the ribbon. The second the bow came loose, I swear I felt a rush of cold air, like someone had just opened a freezer. When I lifted the lid, I immediately wished I hadn't. Inside the box was a photograph. It was old and faded, like it had been sitting in someone's attic for decades. But it wasn't the photo itself that scared me. It was what it showed. It was me, standing in my apartment, wearing the exact clothes I had on, holding the box. I dropped the photo and stumbled back, nearly knocking over my desk chair. My mind was racing. How was that even possible? Who could have taken it? I grabbed my phone and opened the camera, scanning the room to see if there were any hidden devices, but I didn't see anything. And then my phone buzzed. Another text. This time, it was a picture. No message, no explanation, just an image. When I opened it, my stomach dropped. It was a picture of my front door, taken from the hallway. I ran to the door and checked the peephole, but there was no one there. Still, I wasn't taking any chances. I locked the deadbolt, pulled my couch in front of the door, and sat there with a knife in my hand, waiting for something to happen. Hours passed. Nothing. No knocks, no footsteps, no more texts. By the time the sun came up, I was starting to think maybe it was over. Maybe whoever was messing with me had moved on. But then I noticed the gift box. It was back, sitting in the middle of the burned circle, with the ribbon perfectly tied. And this time, there was a tag. It read, "You're next." I don't know if you've ever experienced true fear, the kind that makes your chest tight and your brain stop working. But let me tell you, it's not like in the movies. You don't scream, you don't fight, you just freeze. That's exactly what happened when I saw the tag on the box. "You're next." I didn't move for what felt like hours. My hands were clenched into fists, nails digging into my palms, but I didn't notice until I felt something wet. Blood. It was like my body had gone on autopilot, gripping itself so hard that I started bleeding just to feel something. Eventually, the paralysis broke, and my brain switched to survival mode. I needed to get out of the apartment. I didn't care where I went. I just knew I couldn't stay there. I grabbed my backpack, shoved in some essentials, wallet, phone, charger, a flashlight, and bolted. I didn't even look back at the box. The door slammed shut behind me, and I sprinted down the hallway, out into the freezing December morning. The crisp air hit me like a slap in the face, but it was the first time I'd felt safe in hours. That feeling didn't last long. I walked for what felt like miles, weaving through the streets of my neighborhood without any real destination. The city was waking up, cars honking, people rushing to work, but it all felt distant, like I was watching it from behind a screen. My head was a mess, replaying everything that had happened over and over again. The live stream, the messages, the box, the photo. Everywhere I went, I felt like I was being watched. It wasn't just paranoia. There was this constant pressure, like someone was right behind me, breathing down my neck. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but the streets were always empty. At one point, I ducked into a McDonald's just to catch my breath. It was busy, full of kids and parents and office workers grabbing coffee. But even in the crowd, I couldn't shake the feeling. I ordered a black coffee and sat in the corner, back to the wall, facing the entrance. I was scanning every person who walked in, waiting for, I don't even know what, something. Halfway through my coffee, my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a notification, another text. I didn't want to look. I really didn't. But ignoring it wasn't an option anymore. With shaky hands, I unlocked my phone and opened the message. You left, but you're not alone. Attached was a photo. It was blurry, like it had been taken on an old phone, but I recognized it immediately. It was me, sitting in the McDonald's, staring at my coffee. The photo had been taken from just outside the window. I dropped the phone, my heart racing. Whoever was doing this wasn't just playing games. They were close, too close. Without thinking, I grabbed my stuff and bolted out the door. I didn't even throw away my coffee. The employees probably thought I was crazy, but I didn't care. I just needed to move. I walked fast, almost running, trying to stay in crowded areas. I figured as long as I was around people, whoever was messing with me wouldn't try anything. But the city didn't feel safe anymore. The streets were too open, the alleys too dark. Every time I turned a corner, I expected to see that figure in red standing there, grinning. I ended up in a park a few miles from my apartment. It was one of those huge city parks with a frozen pond and bare trees covered in snow. Normally, it was beautiful, but today it felt empty and cold. The only sound was the crunch of snow under my boots. I found a bench near the edge of the pond and sat down, trying to calm myself. My breath was visible in the air, coming out in short, panicked bursts. I pulled my phone out again, desperate to find something, a way to track the number, a Reddit thread, anything. But when I unlocked it, the screen was already on, and it wasn't on the home screen. It was a video. At first, I thought maybe I'd accidentally opened YouTube. But this wasn't YouTube. The interface was different, plain black, with no controls or options, just the video. It took me a second to realize what I was looking at. It was my apartment. The video was dark and shaky, like it had been filmed on a handheld camera, but I recognized the layout immediately. The view was from inside, slowly panning through my living room and kitchen. The camera paused in front of the door to my bedroom. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the door creaked open. The video ended there. I stared at the screen, trying to process what I'd just seen. My apartment had been empty when I left. I locked the door. How did someone get in? And more importantly, how did this video end up on my phone? Before I could think too much about it, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a text. It was a call. The caller ID just said, "Unknown." I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. Every instinct I had told me not to answer, but curiosity, or maybe desperation, got the better of me. I swiped to accept the call and brought the phone to my ear. "Hello?" My voice cracked. There was no response at first, just static. Then, faintly, I heard something in the background. A voice. It was deep and gravelly, like it was coming from underwater. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was laughing. I yanked the phone away from my ear and ended the call, my hands shaking. But before I could do anything else, the phone buzzed again. Another text. It's too late. That's when I smelled it again. The faint, acrid scent of burning wood. It wasn't coming from the phone. It was coming from behind me. I turned slowly, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run. The park was empty. At least, it looked empty. But at the edge of the pond, where the snow was undisturbed, something was standing. It was wearing a red suit, tattered and filthy, the fabric hanging off its skeletal frame. Its face was pale and hollow, with that same impossibly wide grin. But the worst part, its eyes. They weren't there, just empty sockets, blacker than the night around them. The figure raised one bony hand and pointed at me, and then it started walking. I don't remember much after that. I ran. I don't even know where. I just ran as fast as I could, not stopping until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. When I finally collapsed on a sidewalk miles away, I realized I'd lost my phone. It must have fallen out of my pocket somewhere in the park. But even without it, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. After running until I couldn't breathe, I found myself sitting on a curb in a part of the city I didn't recognize. The streets were quiet, the buildings old and crumbling. It was the kind of place where streetlights barely worked and every shadow felt alive. I don't know how I got there, but I knew I couldn't stay in one spot for long. My legs were shaking, but I forced myself to stand. I felt exposed, like something was watching me. No, not something. Him. The memory of that thing in the red suit wouldn't leave my head. The way it moved so deliberately, as if it knew I couldn't escape. I didn't have my phone anymore, which meant no GPS, no calls for help. I was completely alone. The smell of smoke still clung to me, faint but unmistakable. I started walking, hoping to find a gas station or a 24-hour diner, any place with people. The streets were empty though. The only sounds were my footsteps echoing off the cracked pavement. And then, just as I was starting to think I was lost for good, I saw a glow up ahead. It was a small building, maybe an old convenience store. The windows were boarded up, but a faint red light seeped out through the cracks. I should have kept walking. I knew that, but something about the light drew me in. It wasn't like normal light. It flickered, almost pulsing, like a heartbeat. Against every instinct, I approached the door. It wasn't locked. The second I stepped inside, the smell of burning wood hit me like a punch to the face. The air was heavy, stifling, and the red glow was coming from deeper inside the building. My heart was pounding as I walked down a narrow hallway lined with shelves covered in dust and cobwebs. The glow grew brighter with every step until I finally reached the source. It was another circle. This one wasn't burned into the floor like the one in my apartment. It was drawn in white chalk, surrounded by candles that had melted into messy puddles of wax. In the center of the circle was a table, and on the table was another gift box. The box was identical to the first one. Same red paper, same white ribbon. But this time, there was a note attached to it. The handwriting was jagged, like it had been scratched into the paper with something sharp. "Open it!" I stared at the box, my stomach churning. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to leave, but my feet wouldn't move. It was like I was rooted to the spot, unable to look away. Slowly, as if in a trance, I reached out and untied the ribbon. The box was heavier than it looked. When I pulled off the lid, my breath caught in my throat. Inside was a mirror. It wasn't a normal mirror. The surface was dark, almost black, and the reflection was distorted. My face stared back at me, but it wasn't me. The version of me in the mirror looked pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes and a twisted grin. As I stared, the reflection started to move on its own, tilting its head and mouthing something I couldn't hear. I tried to drop the mirror, but my hands wouldn't let go. My reflection's grin grew wider, and suddenly I could hear it. A voice, faint at first, but growing louder. "You invited him. You let him in." The mirror cracked, and I stumbled back, finally letting it fall to the floor. The sound of glass shattering echoed through the room, but before I could react, the candles around the circle went out. I was plunged into darkness. The red glow was gone. The smell of smoke was stronger now, choking me. I fumbled for the flashlight in my bag, my fingers trembling, but before I could turn it on, I heard it. Footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, coming from somewhere behind me. The sound of heavy boots on wood. I froze, every muscle in my body locked in place. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment there was silence. Then, from the darkness, I heard a voice. It was deep and guttural, like the laugh I'd heard over the phone, but this time it spoke. "You opened the door. Now you belong to me." I turned and ran, tripping over debris in the dark. The hallway seemed endless, the red glow gone, replaced by shadows that shifted and twisted like they were alive. The footsteps followed me, steady and relentless, always just a few steps behind. No matter how fast I ran, I couldn't shake them. And then I saw it. The figure in red was standing at the end of the hallway, blocking the exit. Its grin stretched impossibly wide, and its empty eye sockets seemed to bore into my soul. I skidded to a stop, my back pressed against the wall. The figure raised one skeletal hand and pointed at me. I don't remember how I got out. All I know is that I woke up hours later, lying on the cold sidewalk outside the building. The door was gone. The red glow was gone. It was like the building had swallowed itself whole. I checked my bag, hoping to find my flashlight or anything that would prove what had happened. But the only thing in my bag was the mirror. It was unbroken now, the surface pristine. But when I looked into it, I didn't see my reflection. I saw him, the figure in red. He was closer now. It's been 3 days since then. I haven't gone back to my apartment. I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see the figure. Every time I pass a reflective surface, I see him standing behind me. The texts haven't stopped either. They're all the same message, over and over. "You're next." I don't know what's going to happen to me, but I can feel it. He's getting closer. The smell of smoke follows me everywhere now, and the air feels heavier with every passing hour. If you're reading this, don't look for the live stream. Don't search for the circle. And whatever you do, don't open the box, because once you let him in, he never leaves.